I would like to know whether this is room one.
On my tab, I cannot tell whether it's room one. It just says Zoom. Oh, this is not room one. I'm not the chair for room one. Room one has Esther Abasi as chair. Yeah, this is not room one.
Okay, thank you.
Someone, no worries. Someone raised their hand, so I'm assuming there's a raise your hand function. Sorry, I just can't see it on my
Exactly.
laptop.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
it's by
just go to
reactions.
reactions. Just go to reactions. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to whoever that is. Okay, perfect.
Chair, please, on WhatsApp, the panelists were saying that they don't have Zoom, so I don't know if they've downloaded it now or something.
Oh, okay. Thank you for informing me of that. Let me just check then, if she's able to join.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, I'm just trying to get you another panelist in the room. Just give me a sec.
Yes, please. Thank you.
They should be. They should be Rorisang or something like that. They'll be joining, I guess. So I'm just
Okay.
gonna ask them to let.
Yes, Rorisang is in the room. So Rorisang, you'll be my panelist for today. Is that good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so procedure is all done. If you haven't sent your names, please do send them in the chat. Okay, I have OO, I have CO, I have OG. CG, please just send through your names and the speaker positions in which you'll be speaking in the chat so we know what for tab. But with that being said, sorry, can I just get one more confirmation whether this clap is audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So then that will be good. That will be the clap for the timing. And then with that being said, I'd now like to call upon the Prime Minister to the stand. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. Give me a minute. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, three things on setup: what the world currently looks like, what spiritual evangelism primarily looks like, and the interest of the religious system. Now, what the world looks like is that the world is increasingly more secular. So more human rights, more activism. Hey, we have rights. We have people who start to realize they have different identities they want to protect, and we've established that these are as fundamental truths that we ought to respect. But even in a country that doesn't, there's a lot of increasing tax to following very regressive social norms. See, for example, Uganda, in which, due to the disregard towards gay rights and other rights related to the LGBTQ+, it has received constant taxation and related find. Now, so the religious institutions in these countries or in these situations have taken very big hits based on where they stand politically. It is very important for them then to understand that it is very important for us then to understand that their primary interests are relevancy and like equivalent or meaningful buy-in. Like people genuinely go to them and then get the like whatever spiritual like engagement they get after getting there. Right? So what does spiritual evangelism primarily look like? It looks like appealing to God directly. So talking to God, having a relationship with him. And then, any spiritual or above the like kind of power that we usually have in spiritual relationships. Now, it also looks like following scripture from like ABC, the way it looks like in the scripture is the way we're going to apply it. But one thing we'd like to clarify on our side is that we value following the scripture as well. Like we still operate under the same framework. If the scripture says don't commit murder or don't steal, we're not going to do that. We still want to protect those moral values, but also prioritize this feeling of, hey, my rights ought to be respected because that is a fundamental truth that we have established for our communities. Now, to start off with what my arguments are going to be in this debate, first is that following or prioritizing social activism is primarily good for allowing individuals to meaningfully buy into religion. And second, it will be that religious institutions having an interest have very big interest in not getting heavy backlash and criticism, and that is achieved on our side. Now, starting with the first meaningful idea, social activism is good for religious institutions for allowing individuals to meaningfully buy into religion. The first premise for this is that most people buying out of religion do so because of moral confliction. That is, they feel the values reflected in religion aren't seen in their daily lives. So you go to church and they tell you, hey, if you've stolen, that is bad. So different things that make you feel, I can't be this perfect. So, and I can't have all my identity denied. So why should I be part of this? And that is what we do not want on our side. We do not want people opting out of religion, opting out of these meaningful moral values because they feel disregarded, because their day-to-day lives feel like they're disregarded. And again, this is true because most times preachers are incredibly conservative and regressive in their preaching. They justify it with the promise of going to heaven after obeying God, which doesn't hold as much water anymore in society. Like in this economy and everything, people do not feel like they're going to need to wait until they die to get the benefits. They want to at least be respected, at least have their own identity here on earth, and still have the protection and the peacefulness of living in that society. And it holds again because stronger secular counter narratives such as civil rights movements are increasingly changing the perception of people. This means that these influences make it difficult for religion to impactfully shape their belief systems. Two, on this claim is that the second premise on this claim is that adjusting your views to be more socially progressive allows religion to access buy-in, to access people who actually believe in it. And then when you get there, you can feel the moral connection to, the spiritual life of being a Christian. This is especially true because before, people still cared about religion, but were ready to trade it off if it meant like supporting hate crimes or crimes that are closely related to hate crimes. This means in this context that we get people being able to access the sense of meaning they wanted and be able to also live a life without being discriminated against. So if I'm gay, if I'm lesbian, or whoever I choose to be, I have the right to exist in this society without being hated on. Or if I'm Christian, I get to live in this society without having the burden of hating somebody because of their identity. Now, on the comparative side, spiritual evangelism being prioritized forces people to trade off their issues with religion for salvation. And most people in secular institutions won't make that trade-off. In more conservative countries, that trade-off comes at the cost of things that like sanctions and hate, and that is just really bad for these institutions. And so we primarily think that these institutions have a greater need and like greater benefits in following social activism. the second part of this argument, like the second argument in this debate is that religious institutions have an interest in not getting heavy backlash and criticism, and that is achieved on our side. The first premise for this is that they have denial, the heavy denial of religious institutions due to their strict ABC like to follow will not occur on our side. This is especially true because it is because you're not going against other people's rights, but rather supporting their peaceful existence and their identities. It is also true because, again, if my rights are valued and respected, I want to respect the institution that carries and supports them and doesn't persecute me. The second premise is that the pain of feeling persecuted for those belonging in certain religions or being affiliated with certain institutions can lead to deterrence. This is true because when you explain that you're a Christian, the moment you say you're a Christian, somebody somewhere is going to feel offended because they feel like you're judging them. And that persecution can be detrimental to the people in the religion. And we do not want that to people affiliated with them. Comparatively, a prioritization on spirituality will lead to Christians feeling left out and persecuted. This is what happens in the other world. And the feeling will be passed off to the people who are not Christians, who feel like they're being constantly judged by Christianity or the side of Christianity. And when it comes to the impact of what our arguments hold is that the pain of persecution is prevented, and hence people are more free and more like they willingly belong to these religious institutions without having backlash towards these religious institutions themselves. And two, we believe that everybody has the right to be respected, and this happens in all these worlds, in our world. Thank you. I'm happy to propose. Okay.
Thank you so much to that speaker. Now calling on the leader of opposition to begin the opposition bench's case. Here.
Hi, please, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Can someone please raise their hand? I want to see if it's visible and how it's visible, because I want to take POIs through hands, like the raise of hand. Okay, that's fine. I've seen it. You can, yeah. Thank you very much. So if you have a POI, just raise that thing, and then I will take you. Let me just get my timer real quick. All right. Once again, I'm Arya, and I'll be going as the leader of opposition, and I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The first problem with opening government cases is that they fail to analyze what exactly is important to these religious organizations in the first place, right? And that's what I'm going to do first. First thing that they need is more buy-ins, because that's what gives them money. They care more about saving people. But the second important thing that they also care about that OG fails to mention is the doctrinal preservation of their religion itself. 3 key reasons why that's true. Number 1, those doctrines are the ones that differentiate them from other religions, because there are 1,000 religions that exist. But then 2, the reason why that's true is because people are willing to die for their religions. We've seen it in Burkina Faso, we've seen it in Iran, we've seen it in Pakistan. Literally in every country it happens. People are willing to die for their religion, which means is that they care about their doctrinal preservation no matter what it takes. Thirdly, is that institutions themselves care about spirituality, because that's their unique goal within the society. That's the unique thing that they play within society. That's the unique benefit they have and impact they have on people's lives to a large extent. Because of that, they care about doctrinal preservation to a large extent. That's analysis and proof that you do not get from opening government. Now, we think that spiritual evangelism is important to maintain both of these goals, because understand how support in this context does not mean activism. We are okay with the religious organizations supporting them because and making environments safer for these people. Like if there are women within the society and you're preventing women from being raped in their homes and you're preaching that, oh, this bad thing should not be done, it's support. Activism most likely means that you basically making your whole church about feminism, or basically you giving minorities, like your whole church saying that, oh, minorities want equal rights, and basically your whole church starts looking at like starts being identified as somebody who is liberal and something like that. So what in our world it means, what we think it means that's in this case, what normal support means that you giving minorities equal say in your church, but it
Point
doesn't
of
necessarily mean
information.
that you're actively doing activism, because it's mostly in there. I said raise up your hand, please. In most instances, three things that you have to note: that it's mostly in their doctrines already, and part of spirituality to be moral. That means not to hurt anybody. That means not to discriminate against anybody, right? But activism actually means you campaigning for them on roads, on probably social media, or making a public statement, so much so that your church is identified as a feminist church or a minority church to a large extent, because that's what makes it different from status quo. That's what government has to defend, because in status quo we see churches trying to subtly involve, like subtly accept more females as leaders. We see churches trying to subtly accept maybe people from different races within their churches, right? So what this means is that what government bench has to defend is something different from status quo, and what that means is that active campaigning and political statements that exist within the society. I'll take, if you have a POI. 3, 2,
Okay,
1.
so
All right.
why is it the case that if it is the case that doctrinal preservation is something so important, why is it that religions still don't follow their same tactics of slavery, war, and genocide that they clearly endorse in their books?
I don't think those are the only things that are important for doctrinal preservation. Slavery and genocide was basically done to perpetuate harm to people. That's very different from doctrinal preservation itself. So I think that there is no logical correlation in that. Anyway, so to my first case, then we think prioritization actively hurts their image, because in their case they're prioritizing social activism because now they're taking an active stance. We think they should be neutral like they are in status quo, because now they don't, in status quo they don't come out actively as somebody who is westernized. We think the first thing that these religious organizations look at is buy-ins, right? And that's what OG was also talking about. We think they're required to position themselves in such a way that they will have more people. But understand how these religious organizations even function within the society. They give spirituality, they give purpose to people, they give specific guidelines on how to work. They solve their people's existential crisis about why they are in this world and how they came about in the first place, right? At a point in time where religious organizations deviate from that unique benefit that is given to them, they harm their position within the society, and it has different impacts in conservative areas and in liberal areas. In conservative areas, what happens is that you actively harm the people because of the stark difference that exists, because these ideologies have a huge polarizing power. They actively then come out as western agendaized, something like that. For example, in Iran, when religious organizations started adopting miniskirts and liberal ideologies, we saw a stark difference of a huge bad organization coming up and basically taking them down, and now all women are forced to cover themselves within Iran, right? Those type of fights and extreme opposition comes in because of the stark differences that religious institutions then take, because of this stark difference of the religious ideologies that institutions end up adopting quickly, right? We think in status quo they should be subtle, as they have been doing for a very long time, right? In liberal areas it's even worse, because there are other organizations like NGOs, activisms, personal protests that exist to be able to solve the problem of activism. If they don't get the unique benefit they get in status quo from these religious organizations, they don't have any money, any incentive to waste their money and time within church. They would not have any incentive to go to church, because they're listening to the same thing in church that they're listening at a specific NGO or a protest, right? The only reason why most people go to church in the first place is because they want to get this they want to get some spiritual benefit. Opening government talks about backlash and criticism, right? That's very wrong, because people still go to church. Backlash isn't very bad because it's not very concentrated. That means that backlash does not happen to one sect at a very point in time. It happens to religions throughout the world. What this means is that the harm that backlash has is not very, very bad, because that is concentrated to one person, and that's why it doesn't harm them that much, right? But then OT has to prove, government has to prove why the pressure to leave these countries, these religious organizations is so overwhelming that they will leave. Because we think that they're okay with the trade-off, because people don't expect to get their rights from religious organizations. They expect to get it from the government and criminal justice system, because these are the institutions that have more power to give it, right? Let's say the worst case scenario. People do leave. We think that idea of it's okay for religious people because they get pleasure from giving spiritual backing more. Once again, because of how I explained, they care about the preservation of their spiritual doctrines. They want to present themselves as religious more because that's what they're all about. That's the unique benefit that they get within the society, that the benefit that gives them, that they give to the society, and that's what their purpose is. We think that important thing, that unique benefit, is something that they
Thank
cherish
you,
a lot, proud
speaker.
to oppose.
Okay. Thank you to the leader of opposition for that speech. Now calling on the Deputy Prime Minister to further their case. Here.
Okay, am I both visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Just give me a moment. Opposition is far too dismissive of Kelly as impacting. This is not just about wearing your church shoes on a Sunday evening. This is about minorities feeling outcasted by the church and understanding the structural impact behind why that is. This is about that one poor black woman in the Catholic Church deciding to divorce from God because she feels as though she has to make a choice between God and her identity. These are not things that you can just shake off. These are pains that live with you every day, and these are things that are incredibly important to understand. Any true religious institution wouldn't value putting their congregation, particularly through this type of torture. I'm going to give you a couple of responses to their case, and then I'm going to extend on Kelly's case meaningfully by showing you why religion is structurally better on our end. But first of all, let's talk about what they give you. The first chat that they give you is about this chat about doctrinal preservation. They use very interesting philosophical terms. They say we need to differentiate ourselves from other religions, right? Let's really call their bluff here and let's deconstruct this. Because firstly, they tell you about doctrinal preservation, but this doesn't mean rote scripture. And we know that opening government and opening opposition understands this. Because when we ask them the POI on whether this idea extends to things like slavery and why they don't preserve this, they say, well, those are not the things that make up doctrinal preservation. So then we ask ourselves in this instance, then what does? If it means that these instances where things such as slavery that we oppose when we're doing activism, things such as anti-gay rights that we oppose when we're doing activism, then what do we mean doctrinal preservation then? We think on our end, we understand that doctrinal preservation understands naturally, because religions shift and evolve over time, understands that their core values that the Bible was trying to preach or religious institutions were trying to preach at that time. That is, in that point in time, maybe that was the context for what love looks like. Maybe that was the context for what sacrifice looks like. We think those are the doctrinal ideologies that keep these religions different from each other. Praying to Jesus Christ, all these different things are what keeps them together. We don't think that activism fundamentally destroys this framework. If anything, we're going to prove to you in our argument why it strengthens that framework. But secondly, then, we think the impacts of this argument are not as huge as they think necessarily it is. Because insofar as we're still able to show you that there is a lot of religion and religious customs that are followed that mean a lot to people, because praying the rosary means so much to that one woman down who prays, who's Catholic, because the ability to pray to Jesus Christ are the defining sentiment of what to be Catholic naturally is. We don't necessarily think that like the fact that you can't hate gay people anymore is something that particularly then like destroys the doctrinational or like the doctrinal preservation that they so argue about, or the spirituality that they so argue about. We think I want you to notice specifically from their conversation the use of extreme examples that they use in order to try and make you buy in their case. They talk to you about examples like Iran and all of these things that when you start talking about praising or wearing skirts, then this is really bad for the community. I want you to notice that the status quo they defend then is a world where no one talks about these things and women are inadvertently subjugated debated. Why should that matter for religious institutions, and why is that a losing case for them to defend? Firstly, it's because the social scrutiny that Kelia talks to you about makes it very hard for them to operate. I want you to think of Magaya in Zimbabwe, who's been accused of rape, who's been like tortured up and down as a religious leader, specifically because of the bad things that he does by the international community and the social community around him. We think people just don't accept these things anymore. It's not okay to slur people anymore. They're not forgivable sentiments that we can move past. We think this is incredibly damaging to the vast majority of religious institutions. Even if you're conservative, the amount of international scrutiny that goes into your institutions is too much for you to simply bear. But secondly, even if you don't buy that idea, I just want to tell you that religious institutions generally have an incentive to care for their people anyway. We don't think that they want to marginalize and make people feel as if they're excluded. We think whilst they might do it as an aftermath of trying to push Jesus forward, we think the idea in itself is that they have no incentive to torture the people who are within their congregants. We don't think that primarily makes up like a sensible part of their case in itself, right? So we're going to then argue to you specifically why then we think religion is far better in a world in which we prioritize social activism over spiritual evangelism. But top of this argument is a bit of framing. First, we don't think that any side of this debate is going to be an extreme pursuer. That means we don't think that like churches are going to become leftist organizations as the opposition wants to claim. Why is this true? One, because firstly, religion still needs to operate within its natural framework for it to be religion. For you to be identified as Christian, you still need to pray the rosary. You still need to pray to Jesus Christ. All of these things are things that probably far leftist groups don't even agree with as like a framework in itself. But we think just like the nature of adopting activism in this religion means we slightly water down the type of activism that we do to make it palatable to the religious framework. But secondly, we think religion sometimes also can be really fairly vague. This means that the interpretation of scriptures is actually created by the incentives behind the church. That means that your ability to like interpret Matthew 3 verse 12 by a pastor could be different from pastors specifically because of what incentives you have. In this debate, we're simply arguing that the incentives should be inspired more so by the idea of trying to have social activism rather than the ideas of having spiritual evangelism. We'll prove to you why this is important then. We think that religion is far better in a world in which we prioritize social activism over spiritual evangelism for the following reasons. One, we say true religion is inspired by doctrines of love, of all these things, forgiveness, etc. We think the reason why this is true is because the scriptures change, the contexts change, but the ideas behind the Bible still remain the same. We think these are what the true doctrines are. We don't think the true doctrine is to hate gay people. We think it's more so about like the ideas or the themes of ideas that come under these. Spiritual evangelism then often is coupled with the need to be conservative, and this is harmful for three reasons. One, because religion is naturally conservative, but secondly, to catch up with the wants of like Jesus Christ, etc., it means you need to be religiously close to those ideals as possible. The problem with what this is that it's too easy to be co-opted. What this means is things like homophobia begin to seep in. This means it doesn't become neutral. A neutral stance gets co-opted easily by homophobic rhetoric, gets co-opted by all these types of rhetoric that really make religion regressive. Comparatively then, social activism being prioritized makes it difficult to be co-opted by hate crimes, specifically because the nature of social activism is that it's prioritizing things like love and care towards people, equality, to make sure that people feel like they matter within the social space. Why is this incredibly important? Because this is what the defining factor is between one gay person that's able to comfortably attend church and one that isn't. We think on opposition, they don't give a damn whether gay people can attend church. They don't give a damn whether poor black women can come in and actually attend church. We think this is something that we are able to do comfortably on our end because we care about all minorities. And to be religious is to function this care towards these individuals. We think because of this, we're very proud to propose.
Okay. Thank you to that speaker. Now calling on the deputy leader of opposition to close off the opening half of today's debate. Here.
Hi, Ai, could you please quickly look at WhatsApp real quick?
Pardon?
Hello, Chair. Please confirm
Sorry,
I'm
fine.
audible.
Yes, you are audible.
All right. Um, all right. Beginning the speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's take this out first of all. The burden of opening opposition and the entire opposition bench in this debate is to explain how these religious institutions benefit less from prioritizing social justice activism. Panel, please read the motion again. It is grossly unfair of opening government to try to push a burden on our team and to every other team in this house to prove that the society benefits from that prioritization. And that's their first mistake, right? They say that they are arguing for the minorities, i.e., the members of these institutions who disagree with the positions of these churches on these social justice movements. Why is opposition supposed to inherently care about these people in the first place? Because our focus is on whether these religious institutions benefit. And even if you take the fact that like these religious institutions should care about like every single one of their members and all of that, I'm going to address why these minorities that he calls them are the last or the least important people in this debate within my speech. And when I get there, I'm going to flag it so that it's very clear to everyone. But before I continue, their criticism of our case on doctrinal preservation. Panel, it is very true that as time passes, every religion evolves meaningfully in terms of their doctrine. For example, the current Bishop of Canterbury is currently a female, when previously women weren't allowed to occupy these kinds of positions, right? We know that these kinds of reforms exist. But the reason why we can still argue doctrinal preservation is because of the beautiful analysis that the DPM gave us, that these doctrines are usually blameless. In fact, when you look at historical precedents, things like slavery and genocide and like colonialism were politically motivated and simply used religions as the instruments by which like these kinds of nefarious acts were committed. However, whenever you go back to like the biblical texts or the doctrinal texts, the tenets by which the religions are founded on, you realize that most of these like doctrines are sound at the end of the day and do not like constitute social justice harms. That's the reason why like all of the problems that they try to paint on our side do not exist. But before I continue, I'm going to explain what exactly this prioritization looks like. For example, like Alia mentioned, when these churches go out there into the public space, when they get media airtime, when they engage with the general society, it looks like these kind of things are the things that are going to be spoken about. It looks like all of the focus of the church, because this is a prioritization, all of the focus of the churches or the mosque or whatever religious institution you want to consider is going to be on talking about these particular things. And that is the reason why we say it constitutes a spiritual neglect of the people. Because, panel, we already have 1,001 institutions that are already eager to talk about social justice. We have like governmental institutions, non-governmental institutions. We have bodies whose entire work is to do this. We don't see why the interest of the church benefits directly from this. And this is, panel, take note, I've already called this out, I'm calling it out again. Opening government doesn't show us how the church or the religious institutions benefit from this. We treat the debate as if we are just arguing the value, when the motion specifically asks us to argue like the interest of the church or the benefits that these religions get from it. What extension are you going to get from me? I'm going to talk to you about something very simple. We need to consider that when it comes to religious institutions, who is social justice activism really for as against spiritual evangelism? Now, this question is important because of three things. Number one, because the religious institutions gain their benefits from the buy-ins that they receive from society. Panel, please listen. These buy-ins that religious institutions gain are twofold. Number one, they gain buy-ins from the members, i.e., through participation in activities or adherence to doctrine or sacrifice of their self-identity to belong to these institutions, right? And they also gain buy-ins from non-members, that is the general members of the society, i.e., through acknowledgement of the legitimacy, like how all of us accept churches like the Roman Catholic Church or even like Islam, or acknowledgement of their utility within the society, such that even if you do not ascribe to Islam or you do not ascribe to Christianity, you know the kind of good and the kind of development that they brought into African societies and all of that, right? And this is how like religious institutions benefit from them as well. However, out of these two groups of stakeholders, One of them provides a very tangible, substantial utility to the religious institution. What do I mean? Members sacrifice their time, their freedom, their mindsets, their money, etc. Members sacrifice their buy-ins completely for the religion. It becomes a part of their core identity. It is these people who grant the religion a right to exist, and this is very important. It is these members who feed the religion and who feed from it. Religious institutions exist on an equitable symbiotic relationship with this particular group of people. Now, the second source of buy-in for religious institutions, i.e. the society at large, also provides mutual benefits for religious institutions, right? But in comparison, there are three things that are very interesting to note about this particular group of people. Number one, there is no obligation on either side to endure in this relationship. So the church can one day wake up and see something that the general society finds very alarming based on like the doctrines that they preach. The same thing goes for Islam. Like, for example, like the church's position on marriage and gender roles and stuff like that, right? But the second thing is that opt-out is a very probable thing. The general society can condemn the church at any time and vice versa. And when it occurs, it is very damaging to the image of the church. And thirdly, is that the relationship between these religious institutions and the society is purely utilitarian. Unlike in the first relationship, where there is a consensus on the basis of doctrine, where everybody has sacrificed to belong in this relationship and mutually benefit together. So the religious institutions have a higher incentive to prioritize members than to pursue societal legitimacy, although both are beneficial. Now, how does this relate with societal justice advocacy? As my partner already explains to you, members of a religion largely already buy into the implicit positions that these religious institutions hold on polarizing issues. Pano, this is why I said I would flag, right? Because opt-out always exists for members who do not agree with the doctrines of a religious institution. And secondly, because there's a variety of religions and denominations that exist. And thirdly, because social justice advocacy in the status quo is very polarizing. 100 years ago, these issues were very simple. Stop child marriage, criminalize domestic abuse of women, don't kill people, right? But nowadays, it's not so anymore. These issues are very complicated and they are incredibly nuanced. The solutions are no longer simple. This means that religions which prioritize social justice advocacy constantly stand the risk of losing buy-ins, which has already been said in the debate. But what makes it more important is that every time
Thank you,
religions
Speaker.
take this risk, they actually betray their members, and
Thank you,
those are the
Speaker.
they are supposed to prioritize within this debate
Speaker
for all the
time.
reasons that they benefit them. Vote opening opposition.
Okay. Thank you to that speaker. Now calling on the member of government to open the closing half of today's debate. Here.
Here. Just want to confirm that I'm audible to the chair and the panelist.
Yes, you're audible.
All right, perfect. So priority for POIs will go to opening opposition, but should closing have anything they wish to say, I would sincerely appreciate it at any point in time within my speech. So just give me a second as I get my timer ready, and then we can get started promptly. All right, great stuff. So starting my speech now. Chair, I think the biggest failure with opening half is a lack of clarity of what these two institutions, rather what these two things in the motion essentially like look to achieve within status quo. But then secondly, moving on beyond that, why it's more likely better that you have these religious institutions prioritizing social justice activism over like spiritual evangelism, like all these things. So with that understanding, is closing comment. Why then do we think that just people value religion in like status quo? I think people go beyond just like finding meaning in religion. We think religion in a, like a very predictable world in status quo and like all these things. But then B, we think human beings just naturally seek for explanations for life questions and like things like why do we suffer, what happens after death, and like all these things, right? But then moving forward from that, we think on a social level, religion builds identity and belonging, like things like shared rituals and like all these things. Community, and I think that's particularly important for this debate to happen. With that understanding, then, why then would it be in the interest of religion over spiritual evangelism? Two things. We think to the extent that people already subscribe to a specific religion, they already have access to like that level of spiritual evangelism on a weekly basis, like say going to church on Sunday and like all these things, but then all the other activities that like churches carry out in between the week, people already have access to that on a constant basis. But then B, they already have access to like, the same religion through the same access they build to their leaders, because they've already built that trust with the leaders they have in the churches. Like, but then B, moving on to the capacity of religion to evolve. And this just essentially also addresses a question that was raised by opening opposition. We think, okay, to the extent that probably religion there's a need for religion to evolve, and it has already evolved from like, say, the past years. It then means that it's in religion and his incentive behind it. A lot of the people who access religion in status quo right now are inherently poor and use religion as a form of like escape to like try and like they suffer, like all these things. With that understanding in the debate, then we think we tell you then religion moving forward towards actively championing for social justice, like social justice, is actively doing something about the reason why they seek. Is why you're less likely to get backlash within status quo. And that just also takes out the charge from opening opposition. We tell you a lot of the people who access religion are people who are inherently poor and like maybe who use religion as like some form. With that level of understanding, then we think religion moving forward towards social justice activism only alleviates the same suffering, or rather, or not, alleviates the same suffering which these people access on a day-to-day basis. But even in the worst case scenario, where this is not necessarily what happens, right? We think religion actively doing something against the same have access on a day-to-day basis is actively going towards the same incentive that these people access the religion which they are accessing right now in the first place. That already tells you on an implicit impact you are acting towards the people who access religion. You're acting towards the biggest incentive why people access religion in the first place. But then B, you are actively going towards what a lot of the people who subscribe to that religion even want in the first place. That already serves to like A, the people's incentives, but then B, the churches, the religion's incentive, like to social bonds and like all these things. But then let's have a conversation regarding what then happens when the church, right? Because there are a couple of things then that need to be discussed. But before I proceed, I'll take opening opposition. Go ahead.
We think social justice is very vague. So, for example, if you're for basically want climate change activism and you're trying to promote vegetarian diet, it's bad for poor people. So, what exactly do religious people then promote? Because it's very.
All right, speaker time. Thank you. So, with that understanding, then we think religion moving towards social justice activism is more likely to be very careful. Of the methods and forms of social justice activism that they're willing to take. This then tells you they're more likely to pick something. Their congregation, a lot of their followers are essentially like going to, like say something like poverty or something like. religion is very careful in picking it like the best forms of social justice activism, which it will go to. But then let's have a conversation regarding that and like why it's even more likely to succeed in status quo and even taking away the charge of backlash. Let's characterize to you like social justice movements, like now being actively led by like religious movements. Or other religions, right? We think they already have leaders, and these leaders arise organically. They've already earned the trust and support of the broader or like the broader congregation to even become a leader in the first place. Why? They're the same people they go to church to listen to in the first place. B, these leaders also have the congregation's best interest at heart, and they're receptive to feedback from the same people they listen to. Why? They do not want to actively lose the people who have subscribed to that religion in the first place. But then B, they must maintain trust. We think if that's the scenario, then if this leader betrays like the same people whom put them there, they lose credibility and they also face internal backlash. The religion does not want to have that in status quo. With that analysis, then they have strong preemptive incentives to strategize carefully and ensure they're not straying away from what their people actively believe in. But then thirdly, they're usually selfless. Why? It's actually in religion to be selfless, but then B, they're also devoted intensely to the cause. They want to protect their religion, but then B, they also want to protect the people they're with. Moving forward from that, a couple more constructive arguments on the same. They're also more likely to mobilize these same followers. Why? Because the followers are committed and all these things. But then B, they're also more likely to increase the long-term sustainability of this social justice movement. We think on both sides of the debate, these movements can disappear like before even like say something like the next election cycle and like all these things. But then what's more likely to happen then is that leaders will inspire these people, but then B, these leaders will also reduce burnout that these people actively face on a day-to-day basis, and they use religion as part of the like ways to reduce that burnout. But then thirdly, most importantly, they ensure durable participation in these social justice movements. So it's actually just make sure that you even get some level of meaningful change. But even where you don't get that meaningful change,
Thank you,
at least
Speaker.
you've done something. With that, we rest.
Perfect. Thank you to that, Speaker. Can someone just confirm if you do hear my claps at the 1 minute, 6 minute, and 7 minute marks?
No, we don't. Thanks.
Okay,
You
so
can
I'm
send a
guessing the
reaction.
mic doesn't. Yes, so I'm guessing the mic doesn't pick it up. So I'm so sorry about that. I was just realizing as the speeches were going. So I'll do the reaction of the hand clap at 1 minute, 6 minutes, and then 7:15. So I'm so sorry about that, guys. I was just checking. With that being said, I'd now like to call upon the member of opposition to begin their speech. Here.
Yeah, hope I'm audible. Am I audible, Chair?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, cool. My name is Anene Ebubeshku Anthony. I'm going to be the member of opposition for this round. Aliyah, I'd like to apologize for the other day on Discord. I think the previous tournament. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, so for the sake of POIs, if you have a POI, just unmute. You just need to do this once, mind you. Just unmute, say POI OG or POI CG. Please do it just once, do not badger. Even if I don't take you at that point in time, I would note the fact that you have a POI, and I probably will take you later as well. Yeah, if I cut off as well, please just notify my partner. I'll begin very shortly. Okay, so assuming I'm still audible, beginning in 3, 2, and 1. Panel of the House, we've had a very beautiful debate so far from all three teams. However, closing opposition is going to take today's debate. Why? Because the extension that we provide, 2 extensions that we generally provide, are basically going to serve as a precursor or as the foundation before you are necessarily able to get whatsoever benefit that you get from either OGCG or even opening opposition within the purview of today's debate. The biggest push that came from closing government to this debate was at the start of their speech, saying people would necessarily always have access to spiritual evangelism regardless. We argue that the counterfactual is more true, in the sense that whether or not religious institutions prioritize social activism, they are more likely to get it from other places, because NGOs, minority organizations, social justice movements, and co. would always primarily exist. However, within the purview of status quo, religious institutions oftentimes are the only arbiters of spiritual evangelism. What it means is that if they reduce it, which is what they necessarily do, and focus on social activism, these individuals necessarily do not have any other place to necessarily get this from, which inherently still defeats their own logic in and of themselves. But that's not our shot within the purview of the debates. Onto the extensions then. The first thing you need to note, panel, is that religious institutions derive their power from perceived moral authority, which allows them to shape family structures, education, marriage norms, morality, and culture over generations. Prioritizing social activism undermines the authority, weakening their influence both internally and externally. This is a case that speaks to how comes religious institutions are able to shape societal perceptions or even shape societal morals over the years. Our claim is quite simple. In a world where they do not prioritize spiritual activism, because you need to understand what happens when you don't prioritize spiritual activism. When you don't prioritize spiritual activism, it means you prioritize social activism based on how the debate proceeds itself. But the problem with that is that the way society perceives you oftentimes is by what you prioritize. Why? Because at certain times where you prioritize things, it means that those are the things that you continually do over and over again. And when you do those things more times than you do other things, that becomes the lens with which people begin to perceive you. So the reason why we perceive religious institutions as spiritual organizations is because in status quo, they prioritize spiritual activism or spiritual evangelism rather over other things. Why is it true then that they lose their moral authority in instances, or they lose their moral power or their authority in instances where they necessarily prioritize the word that government is trying to tell you? The first mechanism is that there's a moral frame dilution. The claim here is quite simple. Focusing on activism shifts followers' evaluation from moral guidance to policy outcomes. So the reason how it reduces influence forward. The first is that followers now start judging the religious authority based on short-term social wins or political successes rather than enduring ethical principles. But two is that when the measure of authority is now contingent on activism success, religion no longer functions as a universal moral compass. People only follow religion in government's world when outcomes align with their preferences or the institution succeeds externally. The third reason is then, therefore, that as a result, the institution now loses leverage over personal and cultural behavior, such as marriage, parenting, sexual ethics, because people stop perceiving its teachings as inherently authoritative. The impact of this is quite simple. Authority becomes conditional, reducing influence over daily choices, intergenerational norms, and moral guidance. The reason why in status quo people believe everything that religion says, not just on religious tests, but on marriage, the reason why people internalize it is because of the authoritative nature they feel about it, because they feel like this is what shapes my identity. They feel like, oh, if I don't do this, I'm primarily going to go to hell. So when judging things that religion says, they judge it not based on the things that religion is able to do on the outside, but rather they judge it on the basis of spirituality, which in itself is something that is ultimate. God said it, and so we judge it on the basis of God, not necessarily anything else. The problem with their world is that the way people judge religion's ethics now change, because you are now prioritizing social activism that are more likely to perceive you just like any other social group in and of itself, which means, therefore, that all of these things that I already analyzed to you now come into play. But the second mechanism behind it, behind why they lose moral authority, is that they now create internal division. Note that this does not just relate to internal division between members, but even the internal division between people that exist in authority. That's people in authority in terms of priests and all. Because when they prioritize activism, it creates divisions among members, both ideologically, generationally, and culturally. How it reduces influence because congregants now begin to disagree over which activism causes are legitimate or moral. Some may support campaigns, others see them as distracting from spiritual priorities. But beyond that, within the purview of status quo, even though religious leaders in themselves, let's say within the Catholic Church, even though cardinals, some of them might be conservative or some of them might be liberal, they still present a united front. Why? Because they believe that their perception, their social activist nature, or their social activist alignment is secondary to their religious standing or what they believe religiously. So oftentimes they still present a religious united front whenever they are trying to say something. So even though they might be different, the church, members, society still perceive them as being united regardless of the fact that they have different societal, standings in themselves. The problem is when they prioritize social activism, is that you now push social activism to become primary and no longer secondary. And so, because all of these individuals have diverse social inclinations, what it therefore means is that they're going to be projecting diverse things even within one religious institution, which create for more confusion even within these particular spaces in and of themselves. What this creates as well is that when there's no unity, your ability to control people or the ability of people to believe you in and of itself now becomes something that reduces, because there's now ideological impurities that necessarily exist within those particular unions. What it means again is that you now lose that ability in and of itself. The unknown impact of this is quite palpable. The first is that you lose long-term influence because the institution can no longer guide families, schools, or social norms consistently. But two is that you delegitimize moral voices because followers of society now evaluate religion by activism sources rather than by ethical authority. But three is that there's an erosion of social strategic autonomy because institutions now become reactive and divided, losing control over their moral identity. The reason why this case wins today's debate is because this case directly addresses the core self-interest of religious institutions, which is moral authority. Why? Because moral authority is the foundation of all other influence, including social projects. Without it, activism is tactical and not strategic. The institution may do good, but it cannot guide society in morality or in ways really endure in and of itself. But thirdly, is that this unity is what gives it the ability to be able to carry all of those societal projects that opening government wants to have you believe. Without that level of unity, without that level of moral authority, they cannot necessarily be able to get communities to accept them. They cannot necessarily be able to pull funds together in and of itself. Proud to come from, I can see a clap icon, proud to come from closing opposition.
Okay. Thank you to that speaker. Now calling on the government whip to end off their case, here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, sure thing. Thank you. I'm going to prioritize opening opposition, but if closing opposition have a POI, please do shoot. Please do that in the 5th minute. By unmuting. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The first theme I'm going to engage is closing opposition. The biggest case is that the religions need to maintain their moral authority, and that's why they ought to still prioritize spiritual evangelism. I think one thing you need to note as panel is that from government, you already explained to you why there's an inherent decline in that moral authority. It's correct for them to point out that the moral authority of religious institutions stems off of people, like the legitimacy in people's perceptions. Notice, in current status quo, a lot of these religions are facing backlash and limited, bad perception within the eyes of the purview of people because they're seen as inactive, they're seen as neutral, not taking stances in important conversations in societies. For example, in the war in Sudan, they're not taking a stance, they're not speaking for the minorities who are being systemically harmed within those areas, for economic minorities, for identity minorities. They don't take stances, and this is where they get backlash. We say in a world where they prioritize their spiritual evangelism, this kind of image, their image continues deteriorating, and that's when they lose the ability to have moral authority, because it's true, just when you have less buy-in, when less people buy to your ideologies, buy to the things you push within societies, then your ability to influence moral calculus within society declines. They don't prove on their comparative why they have the inherent capacity to increase buy-in, and the idea of buy-in then becomes important in adjudicating whether or not they have moral authority within their regard, because we don't think, and this is just very simple intuition, even in IR, states which have less buy-in, less visibility, don't influence a lot of moral conversations or even IR conversations. I think it's the same for these religious institutions. I don't think their mechanism stands. So even if, and this just shows you why there's likely no moral dilution, it's more likely to really recalibrate the ability of this particular religious institution on our side to have this moral authority in the comparative we give you. I'll take you in the 5th minute. But the second thing they talk about is the idea that authority becomes conditional, and that's a bad thing. I think from my response, I already explained why the nature of authority in status quo is conditional. It's conditional on the idea of buy-in. So even if you maintain your structural continuity and legitimacy in terms of how coherent you are, it doesn't necessarily mean you get the outcome they want. I'm going to move on to opening opposition. Opening opposition talk about two things. First, they say the prioritization hurts the image. I think I already explained to you why the image as is of the religious institutions is already bad off. But note panel, we don't get analysis from opening opposition at the very best why this image gets better. Their best attempt is to say that we need doctrinal preservation, and that leads to this particular image being maintained amongst members and amongst people who are not members. But I'll flip and explain why this is not the case. Firstly, when they talk about why when they prioritize what they do, they get buy-in from members. I think this is largely false, especially when you get the context you get from closing government. Member explains to you why most religions exist, like the valuation of religion amongst people is that they value religion because it builds a community for them. It looks like a space that actively listens to their problems and does something about it. In the opposition comparative, many poor people who go to religion, and like this is just very true for most religions, people get hope from religions. So for the people who go to religion for hope, they don't see as if this religion is doing anything, because at best, religion promises them if you suffer more within society, you're going to go to heaven, and that's a good thing. But the compounding impact of the problems they face each and every day is not being solved. They don't see this religion as some actor that is doing anything to cater to these things. At the point in time, they position themselves as the actor who has the ability to save them. Conversely, in our comparative, when religions take the stance we say they prioritize, what happens is that they reshape their image in the image of these particular people. And that's why the people who exist within religion, who benefit more from the religion in terms of its value of community and hope, continue benefiting more, because now they see their religion. It's correct what they say. When they go to the television, they see their religion advocating for the things that they care about the most, the economic inequality they face, the kind of aggression they face within societies. And that's when you have buy-in amongst these people who are very committed. Conversely, it's more likely to that they lose out this buy-in. But second thing, in terms of the response to the doctrinal thing, I'm going to just explain why there is no necessity for that doctrinal chart within this particular debate. I think member of government is able to establish why, even without us prioritizing spiritual evangelism, you likely don't lose out as much, because the core existence of religion, they still have sermons and all these things, and have been doing this for the most part up to this point. I think this just explains to you why there is no necessity. But the second response, before I take POIs from opposition, I'm taking you guys after this. The second response here is that, we say, even in principle, how we flip this, you don't preserve your doctrines if your doctrines are killing you. The basic idea about existence of any institutions, if your values are killing you, you don't stand for those values, because the next day you're probably not going to be alive to defend those particular values. We say in their side, it's akin to defending a dying horse, defending its aggressor. We don't think that's something that works to their benefits. Before I move on, I'll take OO, then CEO. Please, 15 seconds.
So social justice is very wide. We've already shown you how polarizing opinions exist in social justice, and this divides the people. What they want is simply heaven and hell in spirituality, heaven and Jannah in spirituality, and that's what keeps them united. But the most important thing is the religious doctrinations which give them the moral authority.
Closing. 15 seconds is up. Closing.
The black clash you talks about increase within the purview of your world, because now they judge them on the basis of social activism. What happens then when they don't necessarily fulfill what certain side necessarily wants within the purview of your world?
Okay, sure. So I'll first respond to opening opposition. They say social justice is wide, therefore we create divisions because we're not able to cater to those things. I think there's a mechanism they ignore from a member of government that structurally proves why we are better able to do these things. I think he gives you why it's likely we're able to be successful in this idea of social activism on 4 levels. Firstly, how they have good leaders, they have well-established leadership structures. Secondly, why these leadership structures have connections and they're able to have social capital within society. But then thirdly, how they have an incentive to maintain trust, so therefore they'll be able to do these things anyways. The second thing is the POI from closing. They say backlash is more likely in our side because we are weighed on success. I think that still ignores what I've told you. For anything they say to be true, they need to prove why they have buy-in. The conversation task is that buy-in is moving away within their side, and we explain to you why the nature of how society looks like currently, it's more likely true that we get more buy-in on our side. We maintain the value even for people within the religion. Finally, as I conclude, why we beat our opening is just the scope of argumentation. Beyond the idea of proving why buy-in is likely on different mechanisms, we're able to uniquely establish why, even for the people within religion who care about community and hope, this is the unique mechanism of giving them this in a way that maintains them within the religion. So we co-opt buy-in internally for all those reasons prior to this debate, both closing government.
Thank you to that speaker. Now calling on the Chief Whip to end of today's debate. Here.
Chair, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Sorry for the delayed response.
Yeah, it's cool. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Like, just greetings, depending on which side of the earth you're on. This is Aristotle. I'll be your opposition whip. If you want to ask a PI, just do the hand signal thing, like the reaction, and just raise your hand. I'm literally looking at my screen, so just don't interrupt the flow of the speech. I'm definitely going to take a PI. Just like do as I said. Let me set up a timer and then I can start. Okay, I'm going to start. Chair, panel, I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Chair, let's start with CO and explain why CG. Sorry, my timer isn't starting. Sorry. Oh, sorry, give me a sec. Why is this? Chair, am I still audible?
You are still audible.
Okay, I'm terribly sorry about that. I don't know why my other device isn't responding. Let me get this sorted out. Going to start in 3, 2, 1. Let's start with CG. There are 3 contentions here on CG. But before that, I reject the premise that religious institutions don't do things like call outs right now in status quo, or they don't engage with social issues. I think they already do that to a great extent, insofar as individuals like Pope Francis talked about the war happening in Gaza and why we need intervention. The idea that the current Pope is talking about the war in Sudan, even though he lives in Italy, who rejects the premise that religious institutions don't necessarily care about poor people. Let me tackle closing government. There are 3 things they say here. The first is that they talk about poor people and why this is important to them. The problem here is that you need to analyze the motion requires you to explain why this is in the interest of religious institutions, which means 2 things. You need to first explain why poor people desire social justice from religious institutions, because that's the only way they can satisfy their preferences. But secondly, is that they needed to analyze the probability of their success insofar as their argument on their own side is dependent on a world where religious institutions are successful. Why are religious institutions less likely going to be successful on social justice issues? There are 4 mechanisms here. The first is there are multiple things competing for state attention, which means that when religious institutions want to involve themselves with making policy reforms or social justice issues that would translate to poor individuals in those sort of instances, they are most likely going to start doing things like lobbying. They are most likely going to start doing things like financing campaigns for politicians. The reason why this is terrible is because it means that they affiliate themselves to a specific ideology, either being a Republican or a liberal in those sort of instances. But secondly, is that they don't have the capital to compete with individuals like Alphabet, SpaceX, that is literally lobbying and financing politicians because they want their policies come to pass, which means that the extent to which you're going to see a change in policy is less likely going to occur in those sort of instances. But secondly, in most parts of the developing world, most institutions or most states have huge asymmetry over individuals that exist within status quo, which means the extent to which religion can remain independent on their own side of the house if they want to lobby the state is literally absent, which means given that individuals like private capitalists within third world countries, but secondly the idea that states has power and control over traditional means of media means that the extent to which you can influence people to change and the extent to which you can influence people is literally absent, but secondly, the extent to which you can influence states is literally absent. And this is why my partner's extension becomes more appealing, because when you literally fail at that particular point, 2 things happen. One, because you have created hope for poor individuals at that particular point, and they don't see those policies manifesting, they're most likely going to backlash against religious institutions and most likely going to pull out in those sort of instances. But secondly, when individuals pull out from the church or other religious institutions at those particular levels, three things happen. One is that the ability to build hospitals or even create institutions or platforms that can help poor individuals independently as the church greatly reduces. But secondly, your ability to control their moral framework and get them obey you regarding things like family, things like sex, etc., also greatly reduces. But the third thing is that intergenerationally, it means that individuals are most likely going to seek self-help mechanism, and what they're most likely going to turn to is atheism, which means at the end of the day, religion literally collapses on closing government. The second piece of engagement here is that they say the second piece of engagement here is, why do you have restoration of hope to poor individuals on our own side of the house? I think the thing here is that poor individuals have consistently suffered over the centuries, which means what the masses desire at this particular point is something that they can access, even though they don't have access to capital. The thing that is most proximate to them then is things like paradise, the idea that they can enjoy in the aftermath, even though right now they're necessarily suffering, which means that the only mechanism through which you grant them that particular happiness or that particular preference is only through the existence of religion. Closing government denies them this principled right. This is why closing government loses the round. Let's go to opening government. There are two things here in opening government. The first thing they say here is that individuals are most likely going to leave if you don't solve their social justice issues. That's crap. There are four mechanisms why that's not the case. The first is that there is indoctrination and socialization that exists, that literally forces people to remain in their religion even when they don't see probably like pragmatic utilities materializing to them. But secondly is that individuals ultimately fear ostracization within the society they exist, insofar as religion is an identifying factor. So if you live within a Muslim society, if you decide to opt in, you're most likely going to face ostracization from your family members, from individuals proximate to you. Given that individuals are social animals, they are less likely going to leave religious institutions within those sort of instances. But thirdly is that there is a confirmation bias, which literally means, given the existence of things like rituals, the existence of things like attending a mosque, a church, etc., all of these things consistently reaffirm your faith within that particular religion, which means that the incentive calculus for people to leave is literally absent. But the fourth thing here is that there is state power, which means ultimately in most societies, your ability to affiliate yourself to a specific religion is the only mechanism through which you are able to get utilities from government, which means at that particular point, individuals are less likely going to leave because that's the only way they are going to get some certain structural utilities. All of these four mechanisms explain why individuals are less likely going to leave. Before speaking any further, OG, make it good. Your POI.
The problem with your argument is that evangelism doesn't matter to the average atheist. This debate has to do with people in the intersection who have to trade off religious activity for identity, and why that harms religious institutions in an increasingly circular world. For example, the GSC in China being shunned by the Holy See and denied recognition.
Out
of order, OG.
What the fuck? Like, it's 15 seconds already. Like, Chair, here's the thing. I don't know if this guy is listening. When I talked about atheists, the analysis is why individuals are most likely going to opt into atheism. This debate, the analysis wasn't specifically for atheists. Let me talk about why we reach opening opposition. There are two things here. One is that the state is responsible for the problem that individuals are facing, insofar as states epistemically ought to provide utilities to people. What happens on closing government and opening government is that states literally has to affiliate themselves with religion, because that's the only way religion has the capacity to influence people. The reason why that's terrible in principle is because religion itself then affiliates itself with the oppressor or the institution that is responsible for people's problem, which means that the only mechanism that religion remains like principled or like true to her core is only at a point where they remain independent and they provide utilities to individuals through the provision of things like healthcare, certain utilities that religion right now does to people. But secondly, when you preach love and evangelism within people, that's the only way individuals are most likely going to embrace each other's differences at that particular point. For all of these reasons, see you.
Okay. Thank you to that speaker.